Today, we're talking with Executive Assistant Commissioner Brenda Smith at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection about CBP's efforts to combat forced labor. Commissioner, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to join you. Thanks for having me on.
Just to start our conversations off today, Commissioner, can you please share with us a bit about your background and the purview of the CBP?
Sure. As you noted, very happy to be here and really am looking forward to talking to your members a bit about what it is CBP does. Customs and Border Protection, part of Homeland Security, is responsible for ensuring border security, and that includes economic security related to international trade. We enforce nearly 500 laws on behalf of 50 different agencies on cargo that crosses our borders. One of those is related to excluding goods made with forced labor from U.S. commerce. That is an authority that goes back to the early 1930s to ensure a level playing field for U.S. business.
And what's CBP's role in combating forced labor?
Sure. So the U.S. government writ large has a lot of agencies and a lot of tools at its disposal that are focused on ensuring a fair labor environment. The Department of State, the Department of Labor. From CBP's perspective, we use our customs knowledge and our authority to be able to stop goods that may be at risk of using forced labor in their supply chains to produce the goods that are being imported into the United States. Our authority, which as far as we're aware is unique around the world, allows us to use that expertise and authority to identify supply chains that may be operating counter to what consumers or what certainly the government would expect, which is that forced labor is not used in any part of the production process. Our expectation is that U.S. importers know their supply chains and exercise what's known as reasonable care. In other words, they do their due diligence to ensure that all of their suppliers throughout the various tiers of their supply chain do not use or coerce labor.
Can you share with us how does CBP's role differ from that of other agencies? And how does it work with the interagency process with the State Department, ILAB, and the U.S. embassies around the world?
So we're fairly tactical in what we do. And we are very responsive to specific allegations coming in not only from the non-governmental community, civil society organizations, and the press, but we also use information that's developed and gathered and reported on by the Department of State in their Trafficking in Persons report and the Department of Labor reports on forced and child labor. CBP takes that information and adds to it in order to develop an investigative case that really links specific shipments that are coming to U.S. ports of entry with manufacturers or farmers that are using forced labor, that we believe are using forced labor. We're required to meet the legal standard of reasonably but not conclusively sure that forced labor is being used. And when that happens, we're able to issue a withhold release order, which is a message to our ports of entry to detain goods that have the characteristics identified in the withhold release order. And it's a message to the business community that we believe there's a risk of the use of forced labor in these particular shipments and that additional due diligence should be taken.
So, Commissioner, how does the CBP measure its impact? Are there any stats that you can share regarding that impact?
We look at it in two ways, really. One, we want the practice to stop. And our best days are when a company or a supply chain is able to be validated that it is free of whatever practice caught our attention and led to the withhold release order issuance. We've had a number of successes on that front, and I think all in all, a great impact there in a variety of industries. But just to look at the specific numbers, last year, CBP issued 13 withhold release orders, and we detained over 300 shipments worth approximately $50 million. For us, the reason those are important is because they send a message to the importing community that there is risk here. Risk that if you don't do your due diligence, your shipments may be stopped and either delayed while we work through your supply chain, or seized or excluded from the commerce of the United States. So we're asking people to do their work up front and make sure they know their supply chains.
And how is CBP working with other countries and governments, such as Mexico and Canada as part of the USMCA, for example, or others?
You are probably aware that actually the USMCA was pretty groundbreaking in that regard, in that it used what is a fairly unique tool within the US and extended it to the customs administrations and the governments of Canada and Mexico. And the provisions of the agreement really call on Canada and Mexico to establish a similar approach where their customs authorities exclude goods at risk of using forced labor. We certainly connect very closely with colleagues in, for example, the United Kingdom, the EU, and in Australia. Two of those countries, the UK and Australia, have their own forced labor or modern slavery legislation that takes a slightly different approach. But I think from a global perspective, it makes a lot of sense to share our best practices to see what's really working so we can address what is not only a human rights issue, but also a business issue for free and fair competition.
What best practices have you seen in terms of companies being able to demonstrate they are not using forced labor?
So I would point to two in particular. One is, in fact, knowing their supply chains down to the third or fourth tier where the raw material is produced. That can require significant investment and significant effort to organize what can be a multitude of suppliers so that you know what each and every one of them is doing to ensure forced labor is out of their supply chains. So that's important information for US importers to develop. I think the second thing that's as important is to be transparent about what they're doing. If they're making investments, if they have protocols, they have a code of responsible sourcing, share that with your consumers so that as people are making their purchasing decisions, they know who is really taking this seriously and ensuring that their supply chains are clean.
I think we'd love to hear your insight in terms of how organizations like the RBA, which helps companies conduct forced labor due diligence, help advance the cause.
So I think you could help us provide information. There are a tremendous number of resources available, not only in the United States, the Department of Labor, the Department of State's reports, Department of Labor's supply chain standards, but also the International Labor Organization has tremendous information about the factors that they assess in order to make a determination around forced labor. We track very closely to those factors and would really welcome your assistance in making sure that the importing community understands what those are and what we're looking for.
Are there any plans to introduce forced labor requirements into the Trusted Trader program, such as the CTPAT? And how can companies have strong due diligence programs in place, such as RBA members work with CBP to ensure expedited trade?
So great question, Rob. Thank you. We have been working for some time now with our business community and particularly our Commercial Operations Advisory Committee to assess just that very thing, to understand what our trusted partners are doing, what they can do, and what sort of incentives might help ensure the free flow of trade while using clean supply chains. So you can expect to see some more communication from CBP on that in the not too distant future. But I think that good companies that are compliant in other areas of their business also have some great opportunities here to share how they're being forward-leaning in that supply chain management issue.
With the new administration, how are things likely to change or remain the same in terms of CBP's policy and operations?
I think what we'll see is continued support and focus on the issue of fair labor. Clearly we have a real need for interagency collaboration and coordination. And I think we will begin to see more of that, focused on managing and taking action on forced labor. We particularly are dealing right now with an issue related to China and the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. That is not only an issue for CBP and our partners at state and labor, but it is a fairly significant, we believe, foreign policy issue as we work through the US government's response.
In conclusion, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to share?
I think just would, again, really make sure that they're taking the message to heart to know your supply chain. We appreciate the investment that many of your members make to ensure that they know who they're doing business with and what conditions people are working under. Would encourage them to share their best practices, and those that maybe aren't quite up to the mark yet, to really look at their supply chains, gather information, and figure out how to make it work for their business.
Commissioner, thank you very much for talking with us today. We greatly appreciate your insights and look forward to continuing our engagement with you and your team on this important issue.
Appreciate the opportunity, Rob, and best of luck to you and to your members. We appreciate all of the support.
Have a great day.